Good evening. Welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum at Harvard University. And welcome to the 5th Annual International Bridge Builders Conference at Harvard's Kennedy School. My name is Joe McCarthy. I'm Senior Associate Dean and Director of Degree Programs at the Kennedy School, and I'm honored tonight to introduce our guest and this evening's forum. Established 5 years ago, the Bridge Builders Conference was initiated by Kennedy School students and invites grassroots leaders from around the world to share their skills, successes, and struggles in development and community organizing. It serves to build bridges between participants and Harvard students and faculty members. This year's conference hosts 11 bridge builders from Africa, Asia, and South America. I should thank this year's conference chairs, Karina Weinstein. Karina, where are you? Stand up for a minute. Over here, raise your hand, Karina. And Jennifer Scott, who's with her, both of those ladies. They and their team have worked tirelessly, the conference committee, to bring this year's conference to fruition. And they've done a wonderful job. Now to introduce our honored guest and keynote speaker for the Bridge Builders Conference. Dr. Donald Kaberuka is currently president of the African Development Bank Group. He was elected by the bank's Board of Governors in July 2005 and took office in September 2005. Mr. Kaberuka, Dr. Kaberuka, chairs the boards of the African Development Bank and the African Development Fund. He was educated in Tanzania and the United Kingdom, where he obtained a master's and PhDs in economics from Glasgow University in Scotland. He served as Rwanda's Minister of Finance and Economic Planning from 1997 to 2005, and has been widely acknowledged as the principal architect of the successful post-war reconstruction and economic reform program in that country. He initiated and implemented major economic and governance reforms in the fiscal, monetary, budgetary, and structural domains, including the independence of the central bank. These reforms resulted in the widely acclaimed recovery of the Rwandan economy, sustained economic growth, and enabled the country to benefit from debt cancellations. As I told him before we came out here, there may be many places where they are vague on such a point, but at the Kennedy School, and especially in our Masters in International Development and Mason Fellows programs here, we understand very well the value of good central bankers and strong leadership in ministries of finance, and we recognize such people as real heroes in their countries and regions. So it is my pleasure to give you tonight's speaker, Dr. Donald Kaberuka. Sir.
Thank you, Dean McCarthy, for this invitation and for those kind words. It's an honor for me and the African Development Bank to be here. And my appreciation to Professor Juma, the bridge builders, the organizers, participants, members of the African Caucus, faculty, students, friends, and guests of the Kennedy School. I'm proud to join you at this institution whose mission is to inspire and encourage young people to serve in public life across the world. A mission well accomplished. At the African Development Bank, a number of the alumni of the Kennedy School and Harvard are serving with devotion and distinction, including a young professional who is here with me tonight. I'm particularly glad to speak at this important event, the Bridge Builders Conference, and to meet you, the young leaders from different countries who are here to share the experience of your endeavors. The work you do is truly inspirational. You have asked me to speak about the role of leadership in facing challenges of development in Africa. I'm glad to do so, in the strong belief that no durable development is possible without a strong, accountable leadership at all levels of society. As I was preparing for this event, the words of a great American statesman kept crossing my mind. This would be familiar to you, but let me quote. "The world is very different now, for man holds in his mortal hands the power to abolish all forms of human poverty and all forms of human life." He went on, "To those people in the huts and villages of half the globe, struggling to break the bonds of mass misery, we pledge our best efforts to help themselves, because it is right." This, you'll not be surprised, was the great statesman after whom this prestigious school is named, John F. Kennedy, at his inauguration. Over 4 decades later, the world is indeed a very different place. Unprecedented global prosperity. Across the world, great strides have been made in fighting poverty. In Asia, in Latin America, and indeed parts of Africa. But today, despite this remarkable feat, there remains millions of people in huts and villages still bound by misery, hunger, and deprivation. But there is a difference. Their faces will be indeed from parts of Asia and Latin America, but inevitably, those faces will be African. This is a familiar story. But today I'm here not to repeat or recast this familiar narrative, but to share with you a story of hope and optimism, a story of Africa on the move, a story of a continent whose policy changes, improved governance and management has enabled it to take advantage of favorable international market developments, the strong demand for its commodities, and favorable international initiatives such as the comprehensive debt relief. While there remains pockets of instability and arbitrary rule, the democratic change is becoming the norm, and African-led efforts continue to reduce the scope and duration of conflicts. As a result, Africa, generically speaking, is experiencing the longest period of growth since 50 years. The proportion of the population living in poverty is not falling fast enough, but is not increasing either. In spite of turmoil in the world markets and other uncertainties, I still expect our economic growth to be 6.5% in 2008. To illustrate this story, consider the case of the poorest region of Africa, the sub-Saharan African region. With the exception of one country, I expect macroeconomic conditions to remain benign. Inflation contained in single digits, fiscal deficits in check, and the business climate to steadily improve. Foreign reserves will be at an all-time high, $137 billion, while external debt at 11% of GDP will be at a 30-year low. The comprehensive debt cancellation of 2005 has ignited unprecedented private investment flows totaling $22 billion last year. As expected, most of the flows went into natural resources-rich countries and South Africa. But we estimate that about 20%, $4.5 billion, would have been attracted to resource-poor countries, but with stable systems, strong, predictable policies, countries which are well-governed and secure. But we also estimate that probably another $1.2 billion would have gone to some of the poorest, landlocked, resource-poor countries. The issue for many of you, I guess, would be how to reconcile this story of hope and optimism with pervasive poverty, misery, and instability on the continent. Indeed, there are wide discrepancies between and within countries. There are many laggards whose fortunes have not changed significantly. Put simply, many of the countries are starting from a very low base, including, for several of them, years of violent conflict. But population is also growing, and new challenges, such as the impact of climate change and urbanization, have emerged. These are obstacles which Africa and its leaders must confront. Rising inequalities, perceptions that growth benefits are not shared, which feeds into instability and social tensions. Early this decade, African leaders came forward with a homegrown blueprint for Africa. A realization that come 2030, Africa will be as populous as China and India today. We want such an Africa to be prosperous, stable, integrated, and taking its proper place in the global community of nations. It is clear to us that to get to this point, there are preconditions: good governance, removing causes of instability, building capable states, and integrating Africa's fragmented markets. These are issues which only Africans can put in place, and indeed have agreed to own and to fix. But in doing so, we know that there is no single development model. Initial conditions differ. So are each country's endowments, history, and even geography. But we do also in full realization of the critical importance of partnerships. Two types of partnerships. The first between Africa and the rest of the world. A relationship not of dependency, but of interdependence, in which the international community, on one hand, commits to fulfill its obligations, the so-called doctrine of mutual accountability, agreed upon at the Millennium Summit to eliminate poverty by 2015, to remove barriers to trade, to cut emissions, and provide more meaningful support to the least developed countries. But in the same spirit, it also implies that Africa must draw lessons from the past, where poor leadership led to decline and decay, to build capable states which are well-governed, accountable at all levels, and a true partnership, the second partnership, which is internal, between governments, private sector, and civil society organizations. These bridges are critical. Let me share with you what we are doing at the African Development Bank to consolidate these achievements. We seek to respond to a continent which is very heterogeneous: middle-income countries, low-income countries, and fragile states. At the same time, we seek to promote integration among them. Last year alone, we deployed $5 billion, including debt relief. Some of our members, because of high commodity prices, are non-borrowing, but they aspire to become middle-income countries. They have pockets of poverty and a multitude of needs, including lack of technical know-how, which the bank seeks to be equipped to respond with a target of range of products and services, including knowledge for bank regulation, business law reforms, and so on. We're deepening our capacity to do so, and I look forward for cooperation with universities like yours to do so. We're opting to be more focused and selective. We don't believe we can do everything. We are therefore engaged in carving out a set of distinctive activities and responsibilities in sectors and domains that can offer us a clear comparative advantage. Our ability to work together in strategic alliances with other institutions, including universities like your own, could enable us to ensure collective excellency. A growing consensus in Africa now exists that we cannot fight poverty until there is economic growth, 7% per year. Not as part of growth over 2 years, but on a long, sustainable basis. This is the only way we can achieve the Millennium Development Goals. We share the belief that Africa's dependence on aid should gradually decline, giving way to the private sector flows. We see our role as a catalyst to crowd in investment, as a financier, advisor, and a partner. Our continent still faces many historical handicaps. Geographic fragmentation. Africa is the world's second largest continent at 31 million square kilometers and the second most populous. But its land and people are divided between 53 countries, creating the greatest number of states per square area of the continent. And infrastructure remains a major handicap. We have the highest concentration of landlocked countries. 15 of them, home to 40% of Africa's people, live in countries with no access to a maritime port. But steadily, thanks to an emerging leadership, we are overcoming. But we face the threat of climate change in the context of growing populations and urbanization. In terms of reduced food security, increased water stress, competition for natural resources, and higher risk of disease. Africa has contributed least to climate change, but will suffer the most. And our ability to adapt is limited, the cost of which is estimated at between 5 and 10% of our GDP. But we are looking forward in confidence to the future. Africa is no longer a continent of despair. Now the talk is about the scramble for Africa. I, for one, very much welcome this renewed interest in Africa, even given its large mercantilist content. It is up to us Africans to maximize our advantage, emanating from old or new partnerships. In 2030, someone has said to me, you might consider this far-fetched. Water might be a tradable commodity like oil. He also suggested that by the time 2030, Africa will be an economic power like China and India. If you think this is far-fetched, think of India 20 years ago, or think of China just after the Cultural Revolution. Our task, our bridge to build, is for Africa to bring this outcome. Thank you once again, Dean, for inviting me to the Kennedy School. Thank you to the bridge builders for this wonderful invitation. I thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll take some questions. Thank you very much. We'll look forward to 2030, and we'll check back at that point. Now, as is our custom, we will take some questions from the floor. There are microphones on the floor and then microphones in the middle loges. And if we follow our normal pattern of making your questions brief and identifying yourself prior to asking the question. And we have a questioner here. We'll start with you.
Good evening. My name is Don Lambert, and 3 years ago when I was a grad student here, I did my summer internship at your institution. My question is, as you grow your private sector lending operations, which sectors are going to be your priority and why, or are your priority and why?
I missed the first part.
As you grow your institution, which sectors?
The private sector, within private sector lending.
We have 3 tests for our involvement in private sector. One of them is additionality. Second is development impact. And thirdly, and this is important, we have to manage the risk for the institution. Now, subject to these 3 constraints, so to speak, we're very keen to ensure that the issues I've mentioned here, which constrain Africa's capacity to attract investment, become our first port of call. I refer to infrastructure, in particular energy. Go across Africa today from South Africa to Algeria, energy is a serious problem. Now we try to promote public-private sector partnership in this domain. The second area of interest is one to do with small and medium enterprises. I refer to the whole issue of sharing growth benefits. There's no better way to do this than to ensure that you spread the benefits by allowing maximum participation by small businesses, especially those owned by women and other groups which are marginalized.
Thank you. Over here, please. Please identify yourself first.
Good evening, Dr. Kabaruka. My name is Wangari Kibuchi. I'm a Master of Public Administration in International Development, second year here at KSG. My question is in regards to the conflicts in Africa, for example, like the war in Darfur and most recently the civil strife in Kenya. When we see people negotiating to bring peace into these countries, we usually hear of the USA or the UN. What is Africa Development Bank's role in organizations such as the African Union in promoting peace and governance, for example? I know there's a governance program in African Development Bank. Thank you.
Thank you. Of course, these conflicts are regrettable. But for every conflict you see today, 10 years ago there was a dozen. I see Ellen Johnson was here. She's a proof that Africa is able to make progress. It takes time. It takes time. For every failed election, there are a dozen of elections which have succeeded. Since almost a decade, we have hardly had a military takeover. We have bad elections, which is already progress, but we have no military takeover. Now, even Kenya, some very positive things you should notice. There are many Kenyans here who know their country better than I. People are contesting the election at the presidential level, but everyone agrees parliament reflects the will of the people. That is a major step forward. There is a parliament which everyone agrees represents the will of the people. There is a press which is working. There is civil society organizations which are active. Now, this is a large expansion of the democratic space. Now, the person leading the discussion to find a solution for Kenya is an African, Kofi Annan. He's an African. And the initiative is an African Union. And we hope he succeeds, because Kenya is too important for Africa and for the region. We are not a political organization. We are a development organization. Our mission is to fight poverty. And we are hoping and praying that stability returns to Kenya quickly so that we can continue our mission of fighting poverty, which is what is, after all, the long-term solution for many countries like Kenya.
Up here, please.
My name is Ilak Diaz, and I'm a mid-career at the Kennedy School. I was just very curious about your statement about climate change affecting adaptability in the developing world, because we produce 3% of the carbon emissions, and yet 94% of the damage and displacement happens in an area wherein we have very, very little adaptability. And my question is, basically, how do we start having a conversation wherein we start changing the talk from a first world problem of lower your carbon emissions to in looking for solutions to how to help people that are surviving now, and how these kind of damages are in fact not only slowing down our progress by damaging communities, damaging infrastructure, but then at a certain point even retrograding the development in these countries, in the development world. So how can we engage people to see that climate change affects people that are, you know, on the development side, which have absolutely no way of adapting to climate change?
Thank you. I'm sure there are many other people here able to answer this question better than I. But I want to say to you that for many poor people around the world, the impact of climate change is not a future problem. It is here already. And ability of communities to adapt varies depending upon the means at their disposal. I believe I did mention in my statement that for Africa in the coming 2 decades, probably the 3 big challenges we'll have to face will be the impact of climate change, unprecedented rate of urbanization. 50% of Africans now live in the cities, or shall I say in the slums. And thirdly, rapid demographic increase, 60% of the people below 25 years. Now, the combination of these three big trends pose enormous strains on the capacity of African political economies. I sincerely hope that the world will be able to understand that helping Africa and other low-income countries to adapt is a critical path for collective prosperity.
Yes, thank you. My name is Binglan Xu. I'm a mid-career MPA student from China. My question is about relationship between Africa and China. I would like to hear your comments on the relationship and how do you see the involvement of China in Africa in the past decade or in a couple of years, and how do you see the relationship is developing in the next 5 years or decade? Thank you.
Thank you. As you can expect, this is a question I've been asked several times. I've even rehearsed the answer. A few years ago, I was in Japan in a conference, and among the donors. And then in front of the Chinese delegation and other people, Brazil also, they had put the name tag, new donors. And the Chinese said, no, we are not new donors, we're all donors. We built the railroad from Tanzania to Zambia, where nobody else would build it. Then Zambia was suffering the effects of apartheid, and they had to take their copper to Dar es Salaam. The Chinese built a railroad. So they don't like very much the label new donor. But from where I stand, and where many Africans stand, this is a problem. The international community 3 years ago, through an unprecedented effort, mobilization by people like yourselves, carried through a comprehensive debt cancellation, unforeseen, unthought of maybe 10 years ago. And we cleared close to $50 billion. It is not the wish of African people to accumulate new debt. There's no single African government which wishes to accumulate new debt, because we know what it means for investment. So that is the first thing. I've heard people say, well, there is a fear that there will be a new debt crisis. That is not the wish of the African people. So that is one side, how to manage debt sensibly. There is a second side. In 2005, the international community had also committed to double aid to low-income countries in a predictable way and to open the markets so that these countries can trade their way out of poverty. Now, some progress has been made, but we have a long way to go. Now then, here comes the new partners, Brazil, India, China, and many others. And they say, look, you have the raw materials, oil, gas, and minerals. We have the capacity to provide infrastructure. Can we make a deal? And many of the countries are making those deals. My role as president of the bank is to ensure that those deals are balanced and are able to benefit the Africans without leading to a new debt crisis. Now, I do frankly think it will not be useful to say that as long as a country is able to manage its debt sensibly, a relationship with China is a bad thing. I think as long as a country can manage the debt sensibly, a relationship with China and other new donors is a very good thing. That is where we stand. Now, there are issues which have to be managed. But frankly, as I've said elsewhere, it is not up to China to defend African interests. It is up to Africans themselves to defend African interests in the course of negotiations and in the course of how they use the resources made available by other countries.
Thank you very much, Dr. President, for today's impressive speech. My name is Ryutaro Murotani. a student from Japan at the Kennedy School. I'm very curious about your personal experience in a capacity of a Minister for Finance in Rwanda in the post-conflict situation. So based on your personal experience, what do you think the most important thing to concern in post-conflict economic development?
Thank you very much. First of all, the Dean made a very flattering comment about my role. My role was very modest in that process. I think it was a collective endeavor of many people, including people like yourselves. Now, there's no prescriptive way to find a solution for East Timor, for Rwanda, for Liberia. Each country is different. The initial conditions are completely different. In our case, there had been a genocide, which is something which is unique in history. Now, when you come from that background, some things are more important than others, at least from a sequential perspective. I think the most important of all, is that the government must be fair and govern for all. In a country which has been injured, which is traumatized, whoever is in power must be seen to rule for all in a fair way. National resources must be used optimally in a fair way. The onus for good management, the onus for accountability, the premium for a fair government is much higher than in a steady society. This is why I think issues of governance are much more important than anything else at that stage. Because if the people perceive the government to be fair, ruling for everyone, they are prepared to share the sacrifices which are necessary in the phase of growth. But if they perceive unfairness, if they perceive corruption, if they perceive leaders preaching one thing and doing something different, then the prospects are very poor. This said, I invited to the Rwandans. Now I'm no longer a Rwandan official. I think President Kagame has been here to speak once, very ably on this issue. But this is my modest contribution.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. My name is Brighton Muzingwa. I'm a Zimbabwean studying economics in the college. My question is, the African Development Bank has in the past been criticized for centralizing its activities at its headquarters with the argument that this centralization, along with its limited within-country presence, has constrained the bank's ability to be able to make meaningful partnerships at the country level. Does the African Development Bank and the state have any plan to be able to sort of come up with some kind of a centralization program? And if so, to what extent will such a program be able to address specifically sensitive topics such as what's happening in Zimbabwe?
First of all, it was right to criticize the African Development Bank for being centralized. It was quite right. When I was governor for the bank, I was one of those criticizing the bank for that. So I expect that when I came in the bank, I was a strong advocate for decentralization. We have now opened 25 offices across Africa. And I think in the coming years, we'll be opening many more offices. But we don't want to open embassies. We want to open effective offices which can deliver development dialogue with governments and the people. But it costs a lot of money, and there are risks. But these are risks we are prepared to face. We think the benefits far outweigh the risks. Now, when you are present on the ground as an African institution, it gives us that capacity to understand the local issues and to bring in the African perspective, including on issues which are happening in your country, for which I hope there will be a solution very soon.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Amy Wu. I'm also an undergraduate at Harvard College. And my question is, I'm wondering how important do you think it is to promote and invest in the technological literacy of the general population in African countries in stimulating business and development?
Invest in technical and
Technological literacy?
what was the end of your question?
Oh, in promoting, in stimulating business and
Stimulating
development.
business. So investing in technological literacy as a way of promoting business. How important is that?
Well, I wish Professor Juma was here to answer the question because he's undisputed.
You want to come up and join?
Juma, please come.
Professor?
Professor, please come. Okay.
Professor Juma's area.
Now, subject to what he will say, I think that the biggest, I would say the biggest potential I see for that kind of thing is one, to enable us to leapfrog some steps of development which other countries had to go through. That is one. Second, I think it also helps us to provide more basic services to a larger number of the population without having the necessary infrastructure. I will explain. In a huge country like the Congo, where there are no railways, no roads, it should be possible by technological means to provide education to a wider set of children. It should be possible to provide medical care. If you go nowadays to places like Kenya, you find small farmers, peasant farmers with a mobile phone, checking the prices of vegetables in the market in Nairobi. And I think those kind of things are extremely important in fighting poverty. But for the rest, let me humbly suggest that Professor Juma will be able to help me once I've left here, and he has agreed.
Want to add anything to that?
I'm not the president of the African.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. My name is Rahma Adam. Thanks for coming, Dr. Kabaruga. And I'm a Kennedy student here studying Master in Public Policy, first year. So my question goes to Africa's development lies in the youth, the generation now and the generation to come. What is the African Development Bank doing in youth development? I'm aware of the Young Professional Program, but I'm just wondering, what about the general youth people in, for example, Kenya, Tanzania, Liberia, and so forth, who are young and looking for the future, the better tomorrow?
We have two kinds of youth in Africa to address. And that means almost over half of Africa's population. The first category are those youth in countries which have seen prolonged conflict and civil, like in Liberia, and Sierra Leone, Burundi, and others, where sometimes the youth have skipped 10 years of education. No hope, because even if the economies expand, these people have no skills to take advantage of these opportunities. That is one set of problems. And we have now rolled out a new policy for fragile states to address in particular that kind of problems. From here, I'm going to West Africa, to Cote d'Ivoire, where we're providing a grant to the government of $25 million precisely to enable almost a generation of people in northern Cote d'Ivoire, where kids have not been to school because there was war, to be able to ensure that they can access education, because education is the key for the youth. Now, you have a second set of youth in steady countries where growth opportunities have been very low, and many of them have gravitated to slums in the cities. Now, this is a challenge for all of us. But I want to assure you that for every operation in the bank, we check it for fit in terms of addressing the kind of issues you have just mentioned.
My name is Ali Mekki, and I'm an alumnus of the Kennedy School. My question is related to the last question, and that has to do with, you've mentioned a number of challenges that Africa faces: good governance, accountability, And all of this requires human capital. One of the challenges that Africa faces is that it trains, for example, medical doctors, engineers, and a statistic I just heard recently of Ghana, within 2 years after graduating from medical school, 50% of the medical students emigrate. Similar numbers for engineers, and this is true throughout Africa. What is the bank doing, or can the bank do anything to keep well-trained, highly skilled African professionals, to encourage them, incentivize them to stay in Africa and help with the many challenges the continent faces?
The first solution to keeping our people within Africa is to ensure a stable continent, well-governed continent. You cannot ask Somali doctors, Somali engineers to be in the middle of Mogadishu. So the first challenge is our challenge of ensuring a stable continent which is well-governed. Now, the second thing is that we must, working with our partners, build, like we're doing now at the African Development Bank, what we call generically the capable states. The states able to design and deliver policies which provide opportunities for its citizens. Now, that is one of the major planks of the work of the African Development Bank. We feel that as an African institution, we have a clear comparative advantage, so to speak, in this particular domain. But let me add something. When the Prime Minister Tony Blair put in place the Commission for Africa, I was the minister in my country, and they were doing consultation. And I was asked, what is it, only one thing which you could propose why you think this commission could add value? Now, there are many things, agriculture, education, roads, and so on. What is it that you think could add value this time? And I said, frankly, in the 60s, Africa had some of the best universities in the world. In Uganda, for example, at Makerere University, people leave England to come to study medicine in Uganda. In West Africa, there are some of the world's class universities. Today, very few have survived. Under the pressure of demand and deterioration, the African elite is being trained abroad. That is okay. But it is not coming back home. Now, I say time has come to rebuild Africa's universities. We cannot rebuild all of them, but at least we should be able to do so in a regional perspective. And I think what we're doing now at the bank is to be able to translate this into practice. My board of directors is now considering a new policy, which I have proposed, a policy for higher education, science, and technology. So that's the training. But the retention, utilization, must be a function of governance. But let me also mention that some of the rich countries, of course, have put in place magnets which attract our highly qualified people. And that can only be a contribution to development. We think that taking nurses from Malawi to a European country to resolve a health issue in an OECD country is not the right thing to do. Malawi should be helped to keep the nurses in Malawi and deal with the crisis of health in that particular country.
Yeah, hello, my name is Martin Bay. I'm a second-year student in the Masters in Public Policy program. I wanted you to speak to your experience studying in Tanzania and the UK and really speak to those of us in the room. We've got the bridge builders, 11 talented, we've got the Kennedy School students and Harvard students. What 3 statements would you give us that would allow us to pursue our most ambitious ideas in tangible ways? And how do we capture this moment, this precise moment that will not be recreated, to make sure we take advantage of the networks at the business school, at the Kennedy School, Rwanda, Ethiopia, Uganda, so that for the next 10 or 15 years we do something profound? What 3 statements will you share with us?
Well, that is. Let me answer first of all. I'm not a typical, perhaps person to answer this question. Yes, I was educated in Tanzania and the UK, but we're not in Rwanda. I was not educated in Rwanda because I was a refugee. I was a refugee from my own country at 8 years, like many leaders of Rwanda today. Bad governance in my country had driven me to be a refugee. That's why I was educated abroad. And as soon as possibilities were open for my country to go back, I went back to serve my country. And therefore, perhaps that is only one message I can give to you, is that let us create conditions in our countries which ensure that there is no African refugee. We were the first continent to produce refugees on that scale. There have been before issues in the Middle East and other places, but we were the first continent to produce refugees on that scale. Now, the time for blaming colonial powers is over. It is our responsibility to ensure that we create a continent where there are no refugees. And that is you and I. But the second means that in rebuilding our countries, there are sacrifices. There are sacrifices. Those sacrifices, it is this generation which has to bear the price. But when I look at today at India and China, the young people rebuilding those countries, those economies, many of them were trained here, in many of the best universities in the US, in Europe. Now they are rebuilding their countries. And I hope that many of our Africans in diaspora, a time will come when Africa is able to give those conditions which enable you to come and build the bridges among human people, but also the physical bridges for our economies to grow. But I go back to the issue of governance and the capable state.
Yes, ma'am.
My name is Rosie Osire, and I'm a student at the Wellesley College. I'm also a part of an organization called the Harambee Endeavor, and we are uniting Africans in the diaspora to find innovative and sustainable solutions to the challenges of Africa. So I'm here to represent them and to just ask you a question, because this coming summer we are traveling to 10 African countries and we hope to make a difference. And I'm asking you, is Africa ready for its diaspora population? And what do you see as being the contribution of the Africans in diaspora towards your vision of the 2030 Africa that will be a prosperous Africa?
So is Africa ready for its diaspora population to return?
Yes, and what do you see?
What contribution can the diaspora make to the 2030 goals that the President outlined?
Thank you. I like to give the example of India and China because they are the most relevant for us. And my favorite reading is this one by Gunamirda about the Asian drama in the 60s. Then Asia was being seen as the basket case. Even as recent as in the 80s, economists were talking about what they call the Hindu rate of growth. The Hindu rate of growth. Look at the India with the bureaucracy, with all the constraints, and India was being condemned to be the Hindu rate of growth. Now today, the narrative has changed. Now what I'm saying to you, there is nothing which is historically different. What is different between Africa and China and India is that we are the second most populous continent, but we are 53 countries. 40% of the people live in landlocked countries. If you go to an international conference, there is one Chinese speaking for 1.2 billion people. There are 53 Africans speaking for 900 million people. That is a big difference. And that is the one we have to overcome. Now, politically, it may take time because the history is still fresh. But our contribution in the bank is to say, let us bring down the barriers of policy and let us bring down the physical barriers to allow trade. That is where you have a role. Because if we can bring down these barriers so that our continent is one, at least economically, then we can stand side by side with China, India, Brazil, and others to provide opportunities for the future of Africans. But frankly, I think this is a mission which you're already doing quite well by acquiring knowledge in a great university like this one.
Do you plan to visit the bank when you're...
If you welcome us, we'll, why not?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Lauren Smith, and I do work on access to medicines in the Global South. And you talked briefly earlier about universities and the great role they play in sort of creating human capital and training people. But I was also hoping you could sort of talk about the innovation that can happen at universities and sort of the promise for scientific and medical discovery and development that could happen across Africa. And I was hoping you could talk a little more about the role that the bank might play in developing research and development within the continent and in different countries, and while also keeping in mind that a great amount of the need for new innovation and technologies, particularly with certain medical technologies, is greatest within the continent. So thinking about how you could both foster innovation and access in some of these programs.
All right. You know, I should go back maybe to refer to a generic problem among international development agencies, whether the World Bank, ourselves, or similar institutions. What is known in English as the mission creep. A temptation of wanting to resolve all the world's problems via our instruments. And as a result, we become extremely inefficient. What I suggest in this statement, which we are all thinking around, is that instead of trying to address all the issues at the same time, which are important, each one of us must try and identify where you have, so to speak, a comparative advantage, where you can create excellence and impact. And then work together with other institutions, universities like yours, to ensure that the whole gamut of issues are addressed, including the one you mentioned. There will be no point, frankly, in a bank like ours or the World Bank getting involved in scientific research. We don't have a comparative advantage there. But we have an advantage in providing you with electricity, with water, funding, math training in secondary schools, so that the raw materials are there to do the research. This said, we are developing, as I said, a new policy on higher education, science and technology, where we're hoping to give support to regional centers of excellency across Africa. We will not do it in all countries. We will pick the centers which have an established excellent record, and we will support them. Example, in Kenya, there is a place they call Jomo Kenyatta Institute of Science and Technology in Nairobi, excellent in agriculture, agricultural research. We would like to support a center like that so that it promotes research in agronomy. In my own country, there's an excellent center for IT. We would like to promote it as a regional center for IT development and so on.
Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Philip Grimm, and I'm a freshman at the college. My question sort of builds on what was just asked. Over the past decade, the World Bank has come under fire for its structural adjustment program and the different conditions that they impose on lending. So I was wondering what sort of conditions come with lending from the African Development Bank, and what specific measures do you use to ensure that the money is implemented efficiently and properly?
First of all, I think this is a good news. I think the era of structural adjustment is over. Is over. Many of the countries now are what we call mature stabilizers. Many of them have gone off IMF-supported programs with finance. They have other types of programs. I think we now have only one case in Africa, which is a challenge from a macroeconomic viewpoint. But it is not because they don't know what to do. There are other issues which you know very well. So I don't share the view at all with those who say that structural adjustment has not delivered. I think structural adjustment, which by the way means to manage finances sensibly, to reform the economy so that it can attract investment, I think it has delivered. Now, there were some mistakes in the delivery and design. I think those are accepted by the countries and the international institutions. But if today you see good growth across Africa, it is because of external conditions, good commodity prices, improved governance internally, but also the results of successive years of painful economic reforms, which you call structural adjustment. So I think it has worked. Now, like any medicine, if you swallow medicine, it has some side effects. Now, in some countries, some side effects were better than others. But for me, the fundamental issue is that the economic reforms did produce a suitable outcome. Now, second thing, this is also the good news. The era of conditionality is over. Is over. Why? Because since the end of what was known as the Washington Consensus, succeeded by the Monterey Consensus, we're now in the era of ownership. You have to own your own problems and agree that there have to be a solution. No one can impose a solution on a country. There has to be ownership. Now, and I think this ownership exists. Now, once the ownership exists, then the conditionalities take a different format. Because for resources to be optimally utilized, whether resources are from outside or from inside, conditions must exist. The first condition is fiduciary. The second condition is that there should be governance. Money should not be stolen, and money should be used for what it is supposed to be used for. But this should be owned by the country itself. If that ownership exists, then international support will be useful. And I think we have come a long way. But I think that I would like to leave you with an impression of in Africa today where these issues are no longer in argument. These issues are no longer contested. The economic reforms are important, and for them to succeed, they must be owned. And where they've been owned, they're succeeding.
Been very generous with your time. We'll take the last two questions first here and then up in the loge. Sir.
Thank you. I'm Richard Muga from KSG, MPA Mason Fellow. It seems that we're in agreement that the problems in governance and rule of law are at the crux of the issues facing Africa. And I put it to this forum that the lack of adoption of local sustainable innovations in democratic governance are the core of our problems, even before you go to science and technology and great and mighty things. In your own country, you have innovations such as Gachacha, and that's in justice and rule of law. You have Ubudehe in poverty reduction. What would you tell us or challenge us today, either from the bank or at a greater forum, to sustaining and fostering local innovations in democratic governance? Thank you.
Well, my favorite answer to this is, maybe some of you guys may disagree or agree with Francis Fukuyama, The End of History. But there's an article he published which I feel it resonates well with my own thinking. It was about building institutions. And the argument went like this, I hope I'm quoting him correctly, that we have enough knowledge now, as much as one could have, in terms of how capital, technology, resources go across boundaries. But we don't have that knowledge for institutions. It's impossible to export institutions or to import institutions. Strong institutions have to emerge endogenously. Now, if strong institutions have to emerge internally, what you say is valid. Let me just give you an example, because you raised the issue of rule of law. It sounds in the cultural values and so on. I saw a program on this class in Kenya. This was in Mombasa. So the looters had looted shops and so on. And of course, police were trying to get them to bring back goods. Now, apparently, in one community, it is a local leader using his own local knowledge, local conditions, knowing which shops had been looted, using even intimidation, saying, look, if you don't bring back these goods, the bad spirits will descend on you. And people began to bring back the goods in the shops. Because these are institutions with which they can identify with. Now, it is quite important, as you put it, that we try as much as possible in the coming years in Africa to try to consolidate local institutions, to make sure they are compliant with modern norms of good governance. But I buy your point that maybe we have too much depended on external institutions to the detriment of building domestic institutions, and maybe the conflict is beginning to show.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi, thank you. My name is Vaishal, I'm Kenyan, and I guess my question is similar to the question before. It's perceived that in Africa there's a lot of risk in investing, especially for institutional funds from America, because of the risk premium associated with the lack of governance and the lack of transparency. So what initiatives is the Africa Development Bank taking to alleviate this perceived risk in the local financial markets? And I'm actually working for Deloitte Consulting. What kind of initiatives would you expect organizations like myself to come and support the Africa Development Bank?
Thank you. I'm glad this is the last question because I think it enables us to summarize. First of all, that is no longer the case. I came here from a conference in London on investment in Africa. I was amazed. I was amazed at the level of appetite by private investment, private investors, equity funds for Africa today, even after events in Kenya. People asking me, can you come in with us? So the perceptions have changed. I think two realizations, first of all, that maybe perceptions were always different from the realities, but also that the markets are now able to understand and price risks in Africa. So that is the good news. The perceptions are changing, and they have changed dramatically. Now, my role as the African Development Bank is to reinforce that movement. I do so as a financier, as an advisor, also as a partner. Many companies who want to invest in Africa today, they can raise their own money. I had a large American mining firm going into the Congo, but they wanted us to be on the deal. Not because they needed our money, but because our presence on the deal provides additional assurance to the government and to the investor. Now, this role of a catalyst, we want to play more of it. Similarly for Madagascar and many other places. Second one is to work with the governments to continue to improve the business climate. There are some countries where there is the will to improve the business climate, but there's no capacity to write business laws, taxation laws, banking reforms, and so on. This is our second mission. Now, the third one, which is important, is to, how do I put it? If you have a willing investor, you have a willing government to improve the climate, but there's no electricity, there's no telecommunication, the risk for him or her are very high. So our third role is to reduce the risk of doing business, the cost of doing business for these investors. Sometimes we're able to do it in a public-private sector partnership. Now, my favorite example for this is a large dam we're building in Uganda with IFC and many other private people. We are part of the deal to build a 400 megawatt plant. So that is private money and our private sector window. But also putting money as a grant to the government of Uganda to build a transmission line to the national grid which makes the project viable. And therefore, our capacity as a supranational to build infrastructure, to promote good governance and sound business climates, and also to be part of the financing deals is one we think we're playing increasingly in a bigger role. When I came in the bank, the bank was still a bit timid. They were doing $200 million a year. We're now already past $1.5 billion, and we intend to continue expanding because this is the future for Africa.
Thank you very much. This has been a wonderful beginning for this year's Bridge Builders Conference. And I'd like to thank you, Mr. President, for joining us and telling us about Africa on the Move. And may we invite you to come back to see us soon and often. Thank you again very much.